everybody? Joseph Rothschild here, aka and we are back with another Twitter thread. We are talking about retro formats. Now, we've talked about retro formats a number of times in the past, but today I'm asking a very specific question. We pretty much have GOAT and Edison solidified as some of the most popular retro formats of all time. Both have sprawling online and in-person player bases, and a lot of OTSs have enough people to consistently run locals for these historic formats. I'm asking you to figure out what the next super popular retro format is. Give me your pitch and I will listen to it in its entirety. I want to begin this discussion with exactly this series of tweets by E3 YuGiOh, who says, "This is a question I've thought about more than I should have. The next big retro format needs these three things. 1, skill heavy, no tier 1 cheese. 2, interactive and deep. And 3, different enough from modern so that people can enjoy a contrast." I agree with all of these. Certainly, a format in which there is a cheese deck in tier 1 is probably not going to have any sort of staying power. And even though a lot of these formats are beloved and diverse, a lot of them have very few choices being made. We'll talk about this when we go into the 2016 formats that I know people have posted. One thing I probably disagree with Keegan, though, is what qualifies a deck from being different than modern Yu-Gi-Oh. I would think a format like 2015's Dualist Alliance would be different enough from modern Yu-Gi-Oh to have staying power, but I think Keegan would, as some would say correctly, point out that it is very combo balls to the wall, summon a million BAs and kill you into the sun, activate Shaddoll Fusion and go plus infinity. Keegan thinks that there isn't a format that fits all these three things between Edison and now, and I'm going to begin with one of my favorites of all time, the NAWC format from 2016, largely populated by Burning Abyss, Monarch, Cosmo, and Performapal Pendulum. This format kicked ass. Every single deck had incredibly powerful tools and popped off almost every single turn, but nothing they put up was so unbelievably strong that it couldn't be beaten by the opponent. You even had a ton of variation between decks. Burning Abyss had Burning Abyss Phantom Knight, Burning Abyss Pure. You could throw Kaijus in to improve your Cosmo matchup. Monarch had, of course, Domain Monarch, which was okay, but it was vastly outclassed by Extra Deck Monarch, which didn't lock the extra deck, but instead utilized it alongside powerful cards like Emergency Teleport to get really, really incredible rank 5s and free material for tribute summons on their side of the field. Cosmo even had a bunch of different variants, including the normal Cosmo build, and of course the build of Cosmo that was popularized around the WCQ, Demise Cosmo, playing the newly released card of Demise. And of course, Pepe was Pepe. There were even cool decks around the margins of this format. Cleafort Demise was playable. Super Quantum was really good. I lost at this event to a deck playing like Arcbrave Dragon, Divine Dragon, Felgrand. It was sick. So let's see what you all came up with. Definitely Tangu Plant being included in official Time Wizard events, and now in the 3v3, it's getting more play than ever, and more decks are popping up, showing the format's diversity and depth. I don't know how I feel about this. I think that Tangu is very close to being the third pillar of retro formats. I mean, Konami is actively saying so, insofar as they are running Ultimate Time Wizard events, and the 3v3 includes it as a format. But going back to what Keegan said, don't think it applies to all of those. I don't think the pace of play is that much different than it is in Edison. There are some like balls to the wall combo decks, but those exist in Edison too, and it's pretty much the same decks. Big Pile playing 3 copies of Instant Fusion that loses to anything that has any ability to crack any board. There have been some decks that have been located in the interim since Tangu Plant, but none of them have really dethroned Tangu in the way that Quick Draw Dandy was dethroned. And a lot of the ones that were developed are really frustrating to have to play against. I mean, look at Gravekeeper and Royal Tribute. One of those scenarios in which additional attention on the format might have been actually bad for it. And Maxi's legal. I don't know. It feels like there's nowhere near the difference in terms of the playstyles of GOAT relative to the playstyles of Edison that there would be when you compare the playstyle of Edison to the playstyle of Tangu Plant. The Law Yu-Gi-Oh says 100% needs to be Meadowlands format. The format is effectively the Edison of Zexal, taking place for one weekend before the release of the Dragon Rulers, but includes Hidden Arsenal 7, which changed a ton about the Xyz pool, with Laval Chain, Emerald, and Ptolemy M7. It is a far better representation of Zexal than anything post-Ruler, and to shill the format, they've got Mermail, love the deck, Fire Fist, sort of love the deck, Infernity, love the deck, and Hero, it's okay. I could see this being it. I feel like pretty much any format that has staying power needs to have Infernity playable. But I guess we'll see. Dualist Alliance format has a lot of really fun decks in it and hasn't been particularly explored yet, so I think there's probably stuff bubbling under the surface. I think this is a shoe-in for like one of the front runners in terms of a retro format that has staying power. Shadow is really cool. Burning Abyss is really cool. There's an argument that you should include the next set, which has like the extra BAs and stuff. Historically, Satellar Knight was played a ton during this format, but probably should not have been. It was just kind of the result of people not understanding just how different cards like Shaddoll Fusion and Dante were and what they would mean for the future of card evaluation. Yangzix. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about like the formats in which you don't make a lot of decisions, right? At the time, Metalphos was being played primarily as this very silly combo deck that could like set up a Zolkin and enough negates that you never had to make a meaningful decision. Paleozoic Frog was the deck that maybe made decisions, but they weren't super meaningful because mostly it was flipping the power traps at the points in which you saw you could interrupt your opponent's combo that they are executing from a YouTube video. ABC was largely a combo deck, but when it wasn't comboing off, it was just making one big, generally unkillable guy and then flipping up Dimensional Barrier. And like, I liked Awesome Hero a lot. I thought this deck was cool, but I will also admit that most of what you did was make Darklaw, make Totally Awesome, and hope that that was enough. In games 2 and 3, you were always flipping up shit like Anti-Spell Fragrance. There's a significant amount of different decks, all of which have different engines included in them, but all of which are secretly in service of the same end goal, which is to set up enough points of interaction that you never actually have to think about what you're doing while your opponent is playing. At the time, I think that we thought it was okay because the cap on what you would have to think about over the course of a Yu-Gi-Oh game was so much lower than it is now. But like, if you compare the gameplay from this era versus the gameplay from Agov, it's like night and day. What's going on with her knees? You're right, there are spoons on her knees. Give me toss at a YCS Konami, says Dyer. I don't know about this. Usually when we talk about retro formats, toss is at the forefront of those discussions because it was so well loved. But now, as an individual who's played literally every single format in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, I can tell you it's a little overblown. There's a significant number of decks like Thunder Dragon that are just not particularly fun to play with or against. For the majority of the time that toss existed, Sky Striker was far and away the best thing you could possibly be doing. Depending on what ban list you utilize for toss, because toss is less of a format and more of a vibe, either Orchist is an unstoppable super threat because of the release of cards like IP Masquerena, or occasionally there's this unbeatable, mostly undiscovered tier 0 super threat in Crusadia Dragon Thunder, which was labbed out at the time, but not to the degree that people have figured out how powerful it is in retrospect. And finally, the weirdest part about toss is it doesn't feel that different than current Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, people still show up to events with Salamangreat and with Sky Striker. And I guess with Orchist now, too. They have Harp Horror again. That said, it is an incredibly fun format. There is an online community that is trying to get it off the ground with a very specific ban list, and I would not be surprised to see it take the place of the third slot. Heron says, I think post-Agov pre-January ban list has potential as a retro format. Absolutely agree. Oh, I love this format. Unchained, Rescue Ace, Tearlament, Pearly, all these decks were really cool, had really different strengths and weaknesses, and importantly, were all beatable. It also didn't feel like there were like any singular cards out of the board that automatically cleaned up a majority of the metagame. I like it so much, but it's going to take a long time before this catches on because we are kind of still living in it. Despite it being the 25th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's pretty clear that there's probably only a handful of formats that even qualify for the title of retro format playable. Oh, yeah, we have to block this person. We have to block this person. I mean...